And I will introduce now Annie from UX. Is it still Antwerp or did you already rename yourself? So I'm not sure.
UX.
I'm a bit confused.
We've been UX Antwerp for the past 11 years, and we've recently divided into 2 chapters. So now we have UX Belgium with 2 different chapters in Brussels and Antwerp. And that just
So
happened last month. We're pretty excited about it.
that's why I was confused in the beginning, because I knew about this renaming plan and so on.
Yeah.
You also did a great European-wide event in 2020, the UX Cocktail, where we also took part. So
True. Yeah,
really
that was a really
amazing
fun
stuff
event.
that
I
you're.
think we took good advantage of lockdown and really reached out to a lot of different European groups and did an event all together. It was super fun.
Okay, and what are we hearing today? So just with 2, 3 words, what can we expect from the upcoming talk, Sustainable Behavior by Design?
I'm going to talk about a toolkit that I've recently developed over the last 9 months or so that will help UX designers design sustainable human behaviors and long-term habits. Wow.
So then I would just say the stage is all yours for the next
Okay.
half hour.
Great.
So let's enjoy the talk. We
Okay.
are
Welcome,
in the
Annie.
backstage area. As soon as you share, we can.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. As Johannes said, I represent UX Belgium, which has recently divided into 2 chapters. We've been active since 2011, when it was just a few people who wanted to meet up after work for a beer and talk about what it was to be a UX designer. Now, 11 years later, we are over 3,000 people strong. We run an event every month, sometimes more, now that we have 2 chapters. The event's called UX Beers, and we still get together for a beer after work, but it's a little bit more structured where we have a couple speakers and we share from our own community. So since we're in Belgium, home of the best beer in the world, I thought I would invite you to our aesthetic of it and give you a cheers. All right, let's get into the talk. Today, I'm going to be talking about sustainable behavior by design. And just to give you a little bit of background on me, I've been in the digital area about 17 years, mostly as a UX designer, and I've worked on lots of different projects from startups to big digital transformation programs. And I would say the most relevant recent experience that I've had in the area of sustainability was I worked as an innovation lead for the Belgian Post. And amongst lots of other experiments that I worked on, I also helped set up a new sustainability practice focused on kind of creating a blueprint for last mile emission-free delivery. And we launched a pilot city for that a few years ago, and it is now being rolled out across Belgium. So I was super happy to be able to combine my passion and my work for the first time ever, because sustainability is something that I care a lot about. For the past year, I've been at an agency called Wong Duty. It's a really funny name. It was started by a Mr. Wong and a Mr. Duty. They're a global agency. We specialize in digital projects, UX, and marketing. But the main relevance that has is that we're also part of Emphasis, which is a global IT company and one of the top 3 most ethical companies in the world. They achieved carbon neutrality 30 years before the Paris Climate Accord. And that was largely done through transforming their own buildings and footprints through installing their own renewable energy and water systems. They also do a ton of work in the community around digital access. And it's just, I'm really proud to work for a company that has such a great footprint in this space already. So as one of these big agencies, we obviously are very thorough before we get started on a new initiative that we want to focus on. I'm not going to spend any time on this slide because it's a lot of numbers and things that you probably have already heard, but basically the imperative is there. It is now time, over time, for companies and businesses to be investing in sustainability for lots of different reasons. Their customers want it, their employees want it, they can save money, and they will be investing a lot of money in it over the next few years. A bit more related to UX designers is there's also a consumer imperative. You know, as we've seen consumers develop over the last several years, you know, we've seen them shift from very product focused, you know, does this thing do the thing that I need it to do, to becoming more experienced focused. Is it easy to use? Is it accessible? Is it fun? And now they're really shifting towards this third era of seeking value-driven products. They want to work with brands who align with their own values, and largely consumers are looking for new ways to be more sustainable in their own lives. So there's no better way to align your customer experience strategy or your customer engagement strategy around sustainability. So how are companies doing this? Well, they're starting with the basics. They're measuring and setting their goals. Then they're looking at their physical assets, the things that are directly around them, which is great. Then they start to look at their supply chain. How are their partners doing, and how can they help them achieve their goals as well? And then we also notice kind of at the core, actually, is they're starting to look at experience and engagements. How do they need to redesign their products and services to be more sustainable? And they're noticing that in order to do that, employees and customers need to be engaged as well. And that's really where we come in. So let's look at a few companies that are attempting this and doing their best, but still falling a little bit short. So Lego invested a lot, and it's a really great program, in using recycled plastics for new Legos. They've also set a new internal policy and process to become more circular, where they can turn old Lego bricks into new Lego bricks. The problem is they haven't yet been able to find the right way to engage customers in this. And so most of them don't know that they can return these Legos to be reused or how to do so. So they kind of are stuck with a bit of a half circular process right now until they can figure that out. Another big kind of fail, actually, was the Bags for Life program in the UK. Nearly every grocery store tried to replace disposable plastic bags with reusable ones. And in most cases, and well, actually in every single case, these grocery stores actually increase the amount of plastic waste caused by these bags. In some cases, it went up to 10-fold more plastic waste caused by just this switching of the bags. And if you look at the way that they're designed, you can see, the human element wasn't taken fully into account by the way that they were priced, presented, or even designed. They still kind of look and feel like a disposable bag, which is exactly what people did with them. And then don't get me started on the issue of labeling around packaging. Packaging is a huge issue around waste, and it's been a massive failure on the human scale, where so many different types of materials have been tested, such as compostables and things. There's been so many different labels that consumers are completely overwhelmed and don't understand what to do with plastic packaging. And in the meantime, a lot of these new materials are starting to pollute the traditional recycling streams. So why are they failing so much? Well, on one hand, it's very well intentioned. Companies are setting new policy and processes to be able to enable more sustainable products and services. But while policy sets expectations, it doesn't really create a path to action. And process can enable action, but it doesn't really encourage the new behaviors that are needed to support that. So when you add people to the process, not only can you ensure that your new process and policy will be more successful, you can actually exponentiate the impact that it can have. People talk to each other, and they also, when they make a positive change in their life in one way, they look for other ways to make that change as well. So they'll be looking at other brands to also step forward with better ways for them to live more sustainably as well. And that can create a much broader and long-lasting impact in society. So that's what we want to focus on. And to show an example of a company that did it really well, this is a program that I worked on with a lot of other really hardworking people, where we wanted to tackle the issue of low-emission last-mile delivery. And one early statistic that we learned early in the process was that if people switch from home delivery to picking up their parcels in a parcel locker or a pickup point, you can reduce the emission footprints of that parcel by up to 70%, which is pretty profound. But the problem there is tackling the convenience of home delivery. How do you get people to shift from something that's so convenient and well-known to something where they have to go outside when it's raining? So we did a research track, and we found that actually, if you put them close to where people live, not necessarily where they shop or commute, but where they live, and it's only, what they called slipper distance away, so you can put your slippers on and schlep down to the corner box, people are perfectly happy to shift from home delivery to parcel box. So we completely revamped the way that these lockers are placed and networked together. And in our pilot city in Belgium, we placed 50 lockers in the city center of a town called Mechelen, so that everybody could access one of these within a 3-minute walk. And 83% of parcel delivery shifted from home delivery to locker delivery in that area, which is quite profound. And then coupled with some other strategies around routing and electric vehicles, we lowered the carbon emissions of parcel delivery by 97%, which is amazing results. And it just shows the power of human experience design. When you take it into account, you can achieve huge impacts. But let's go back to the clients that are struggling and how we might help them. So what we've mainly been hearing is that they've set the expectation, but their plans just aren't making it to execution, or they know that they've got to get people involved, but they just don't know how, or it's not working. Their efforts are launching, but not scaling enough to make any real impact. There's a drop off. We find that they're launching a lot of sustainability campaigns, but not really long-lasting programs. And then in the case of the bags for life type of situation, sometimes there's even negative unintended consequences of their execution. So why is that? Why are these types of things failing? Well, let's look at some of the fears around that businesses and consumers have. One, this is a really big systemic problem, and we all have to work together to get there. Two, it's intimidating. It's probably the biggest existential threat that humankind has ever had to deal with. Three, people are ashamed, actually. People don't want to talk about behaviors that might be unsustainable or maybe not acceptable on the outside. We all kind of have our hidden habits that we don't want other people to know about. So it's difficult to understand, the real motivations why people behave in one way and how to get them to change. And then finally, as we all know, people just don't like to change. We all know that we should be reaching for the salad, but when the fries are on the menu too, we opt for the fries. We can't tackle all of these in one talk, so I'll mainly talk about the second two as I go forward. But what we said as Wong Duty was we felt that our sweet spot was really taking a look at those human behaviors and finding ways where we can accelerate businesses' sustainability strategy by designing sustainable human behaviors. So I'm going to jump right into it because I'm really excited to share this toolkit with you. We worked on it really hard and a lot of people have contributed to it. And I hope that we can inspire you to think a little bit differently around how you design for, well, anything really, but especially around things for good, such as sustainability, environmental, social, or otherwise. So it's a new toolkit. It's based in behavioral psychology, and we've worked with real behavioral psychologists on this and used models that they recommended. And the first thing it does is it helps to find the issues that your customers really care about, and it shows where your brand can make the biggest impact. And I'll dig into each of these as we go along. Then we developed a way to actually predict a user's likelihood to change to a more sustainable behavior, and also the type of help that they need to be able to change, because not everyone's the same. And then finally, we came up with some great design patterns and a new design pattern library, actually, that focuses on creating new sustainable behaviors and driving them over time to create lifelong habits. So let's dig into that. So we borrowed this model from behavioral sciences. It was designed to help plan communication to overcome barriers to social change. But what it stood out for us is that while we're developing personas or user archetypes and things like that, we tend to focus on personal beliefs, knowledge, pain points, opportunities, things like that. But actually, there's a pretty vast world of influences that motivate people to make the decisions that they do. And those are, they come from the different sources such as family and peers, your community, your social structures, what kind of freedoms do you have, and even the natural forces that you're starting to see around you. Are you already feeling the effects of climate change? And is that already starting to influence your decisions and behaviors in your real life? And so we developed, a much more rigorous research process when we start these types of projects to dig into these factors that are influencing people and will help them change their behavior. Next, we took a look at sort of the typical business, UX trifecta that you see, which is feasibility, viability, desirability. We really wanted to make sure that environmental impact was included in that as well. So we added a little circle. And while we often have a lot of criteria when it comes to the other three circles, we added ours. Now, personally, we started with, what are the number of people who are not currently participating in this behavior, if we can measure that? What might be the potential impact be if their behavior does change? What's the likelihood that they will change their behavior? And I'll get into that in just a moment. We did create a calculation for that. And then, is there a low threshold to start? You can gut check these to start with if you want, or you can start building models behind that to make it a little bit more accurate. But for us, this gives a nice balance to add, environmental sustainability and impact to the typical prioritization criteria that we use for new features, products, or services. Next, we wanted to start where we can make the most impact as well. So we created a way where we can actually predict a user's likelihood of changing to a more sustainable behavior. And again, we pulled this from behavioral science. You'll see this is called the theory of planned behavior, where it's basically a calculation that crunches the numbers behind what's their current attitude about the topic. What are the norms that they see around them? What do they see other people doing in their family and social structures? And what's their perceived control over their life? Do they feel that they have the power to change? Do they have the tools necessary to be able to do that? And when you crunch those numbers, what you get is sort of a measure of their intention or the likelihood that they will change a behavior with the right types of nudges. And it's a bit too small to see, but we did kind of update what we started building what we call a behavioral profile, where we put numbers behind this, and we can measure attitude by, assessing people's reactions to certain types of phrases that we say about the environments, and some other survey questions and interview questions that we ask. And we put numbers to this so that at the end we can actually crunch those and get a score and say, okay, well, if you're 4 or 3.5 and above, those are the users that we want to target. So we'll look for characteristics there and start with them when it comes to doing deeper research into the particular project that we're working on. In addition to that, we also wanted to identify the different ways in which people need help to change. Some people are really good at it, and some people are terrible at it. I'm in the latter category. And so again, we borrowed from a study that was done in Sweden in 2011 that was specifically looking for how to design for sustainable behaviors. And they came up with this model where they said some people need to be steered, some need to be spurred, some need to be forced, which is a bit more on the government policy side, and some just need to be merely inspired. So for example, a steer profile, they're relatively motivated to change, but they need help from UX designers along the way to help them stick to it and give them the tools that they need to keep with it. On the converse, there's spur, who they are maybe less motivated to start, but once they do, they just need a light touch. They can kind of get going on themselves. And so we can just focus on keeping them, in the right direction, but they'll largely do it on their own. And number 5, we obviously wanted to actually design experiences mapped to these behavioral profiles that will actually help spur and create new sustainable behaviors. So we started from the book called Hooked. And I know that this is a bit of a controversial book right now, and I agree with the criticism of it. Basically, it's a guidebook on how to create addictive products. And most of the examples that are used in there are around social media. We know now that addiction to social media has negative consequences on your mental health. But I would posit to say that the theory still stands, and you can use it for good if you use it in the right way. And what the author says in the book is that you first need to design to trigger a new behavior, give that a follow-up and action, ask for an investment so the user has some skin in the game, and then reward them. And that reward should eventually lead to the next trigger to trigger the next action. And so what we did was quite a big stock of different types of habit-forming apps out there, not social media apps necessarily, but ones that are more focused on helping people live healthier lives or help with their mental health well-being, or apps like Duolingo, which does a great job of stimulating people to learn a new language. And we started collecting lots of different UX patterns and making a big library of them. And then we assessed them and started tagging them based on the system. Is this best used as a trigger or a reward? And we've also tagged it based on the behavioral profile. Is this better for a spur profile or an inspire profile? So that when we're actually designing the customer journey, we can use these different patterns to kind of inspire different ways along the path of how we can sort of just design the actual experience. And we have a big library of them. It's being built constantly. I think we have about 50 of these cards right now that we use in ideation sessions. It's been super fun to put this together, actually. Hopefully we'll be able to publish it soon. So stay tuned for that. And then finally, how do you drive long-term habits? Well, the first step that we take, obviously this is the hardest question that UX designers have to ask, and there's lots of different approaches, but one of the first new kind of pieces that we added to our toolkit was just this concept of a circular or a cyclical customer journey. When we do customer journey mapping, we tend to kind of have it as a linear process. So there's a start and then there's an end, and then there's nothing after that end. So we kind of updated our journey mapping canvas to work with these cards as well, so that we're designing the first time and then the second time and then the third and ongoing times after that. It may be that, as over time, as a user adopts a new behavior, they need less and less attention, or more and more, depending on the type of profile that you're designing for. But we want to make sure that we're planning for that next cycle so that they can continue it in perpetuity. And I just want to call out a great partner that we worked with on this whole design toolkit. We used it as a way to develop the tools and then actually test them in the field as we worked on this project with them. It's a startup in Belgium called Scone. You can look them up. It's scone.ai. And it's an app that helps you measure your carbon footprints and then gives you ways to help you lower it. And you can actually track your progress over time. It uses real data. If you enable location tracking, it'll track how you're moving around moving around in terms of mobility, and you can actually see your carbon footprint shrink over time as you adopt new sustainable behaviors. So it's a great app. We worked with them on a mobility initiative, and we're hoping to get the figures on that pretty soon to see how it worked. And that is the end. I'm really happy to be here today and share this with you. I'm really excited to hear your questions either here or in the session afterwards. Definitely feel free to link up with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear about things that you're working on as well. Or if you want to check out UX Belgium, you can also use the other QR code. That'll take you to our website where you can figure out, there's lots of different ways to get involved. We're on Slack, we're on LinkedIn, and we obviously have our monthly meetups. All of our meetups are in person in either Antwerp or Brussels, but they're also streamed online. So if you check the YouTube link, you can always join us online from wherever you are. And with that, I think I'll open it up to questions if we have time.
Thanks for this great talk, first of all. And there are a few questions,
Oh,
as
good.
you guessed. So I think we just start in to the first one, which caught my attention when it was raised. How did you measure behavior? Really interesting questions.
How do we measure behavior? I mean, I think we can observe behavior and we can see sort of an existing one, and then we can set a target for where we might want them to be, and then we can measure ways that it changes. So, well, for instance, with the collaboration with Scone, we wanted to target people who are driving a lot, who are interested in driving less. And we use the data from the app to actually track that. They can tell when you're on the bus or when you're on the bike or when you're driving. And so the data actually came straight from them. It's their data model. Yeah, but in any project, it's always going to kind of depend on, what you're measuring, but it is possible.
Okay, so it is possible, especially qualitative, if I understood that right, with your reply. So really
Qualitative,
getting some feedback.
especially, yeah.
Okay, then let's move on with another question, because we have a few minutes before we move over to the session stage. One question from my side: you're available in the session for Q&A afterwards?
Yes, of course.
Okay, yes, of course. So we just take as many questions as we can get for now, and then we move along. There was one upvoted here, so I will take that one. What are the roots, the feelings to address behind the 4 different types of steering needed? How do you focus and gauge the persuasion so to avoid potential backlash?
Well, you can use that model in a couple of different ways. On one hand, if you don't have the budget or the time to do a thorough research track where you can actually sort of help start to identify the behaviors of those users, you can just use it as a check during your design. So if a person has a steer profile, do they have access to the right tools to be able to help them? If it's an inspire profile, are we getting out of their way so that they can just go find the things that they need to accomplish their own goals? And you can just sort of use it as a check. So once you kind of have done your journey mapping, you can kind of go through it and make sure along the step each way, you're addressing kind of those 4 profiles. Force a little bit less, obviously. We'd probably be less involved in maybe a force profile unless, for instance, a company or a government wanted to implement a new policy that they knew people weren't going to be super happy about. In that case, we can really focus on a force profile and just kind of try to make the transition easier for people and a little less painful.
Okay, thank you. So
Mhm.
I think we have time for one more question here
Okay,
on stage, and then I will copy over all the questions to the session chat.
great.
So there's another one upvoted right now from Mark, and
Mhm.
he asks, what is the difference between your map and an experience map from Nielsen Norman Group, so NNG?
Uh, so I assume you mean like the cyclical journey map. There's really no difference. It's also an experience map. We've just updated ours so that we kind of have a canvas that forces us to think about the next time someone repeats a behavior. If you think about traditional e-commerce, we tend to just sort of want to get them through the shopping cart funnel, and then after that, I mean, they go into aftercare and things, but we don't try to get them to go straight back and buy something new. This is a little bit different. If you want someone to say, leave their car at home and take a bike, to build a habit over time, you just need to be able to kind of design that first experience, celebrate it at the end with them, and then give them the tools and the motivation to try it again, and then try it again and try it again. So it's also an experience map. We've just tweaked it so that we are building habits over long term.
Okay. So thanks for answering the first questions. I think there might be a few additional ones in the Q&A. I quickly share the link to the Q&A where you will drop in a second.